Welcome to a new series of the Dissidents podcast with my co-host, Winkfield Twyman Jr. Today, we are lucky to host Professor Glenn Loury, who has just written a book, Late Confessions of a Black Conservative. And this book there is a lot to discuss here. Wink, I'm going to let you give us a little overview before we get into some of our questions for Glenn.
Sure. Thank you, Jen, for that. Yes, I've had a chance to read Glenn's book, Late Admissions, Confessions of a Black Conservative, and it's a great book. One of the things I love about this book, which kind of chronicles Glenn's life from the south side of Chicago to where he currently is in life, is its authenticity. They say that great writing is a marriage of two things, life and honesty. And I would say life plus honesty equals late admissions, Confessions of a Black Conservative. The book takes you by the hand and walks you through a man's life that begins in the south side of Chicago, where there is good and there is bad. And you see this through the eyes of someone who is brilliant, who is talented, beyond belief in mathematics at a young age, and then eventually economics. You see this man ride the waves of social change in America through the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s. And so it's a beautiful lens into how our country, America, transforms itself. And it's also a parallel lens into how a man transforms himself into someone tormented by demons of addiction, demons of infidelity, demons of, at times, the imposter syndrome, one might argue. He eventually becomes the first Black tenured professor in economics department at Harvard, and yet at the same time is seeking out the most seedy parts of life in Boston. We actually share that in common, Glenn. I graduated from the Harvard Law School back in 1986, so we probably know some of the same people. Randall Kennedy, for example, case in point. But in any event, this book has great meaning. I come not to praise the book because there are things I disagree with. I come not to toss shade on the book because there are things that I do agree with. But ultimately, when it comes to the task of great writing, a marriage of life as lived and honesty, it's beyond compare. And so I wanted to thank you, Glenn, for this excellent example of how someone can write into and shine a light on the human condition, free from dogma and slogan words. Thank you.
That brings me, Glenn, to my first question for you. This is truly, to use the word authentic.
Jennifer, before you ask me that question, can I just thank Winkfield for his thorough and in-depth and wonderful engagement with my book. I mean, wow. So let's talk. By all means, let's talk. But that was an appraisal of the project that is more penetrating than I've heard lately. So I appreciate the close reading.
Thank you very much.
But you were about to ask, Jennifer.
Well, following on Wink's close reading, what struck me too was the authenticity. I mean, it was truly authentic. You did not hide anything, to my knowledge. If you did, most everything was out on the table. But I've heard people ask you this question. Megyn Kelly, for example, asked you this question. I'm still not quite satisfied with the answer, so I'm going to ask it myself. Why did you write the book? What do you think was the value in these late confessions? I mean, it is truly, again, a story of authenticity and honesty from everything of your brilliance, but also, as Wink already mentioned, some of the darkest areas of your life. What prompted you to write this memoir?
I think this project, once it got underway, kind of had a life of its own. It's like it was going to get written. I didn't start out with the intent of doing what I have done, the degree of candor, like I say, self-discrediting disclosure, the secrets, the raw aspect of it. It kind of just took over. It just kind of had a life of its own. And once I got into it, I realized there was an imperative there. There was an imperative to truth and to a kind of completeness. I mean, who am I talking to? I'm talking to my children who have some questions. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're like, what's up, Dad? What is up? I'm talking to myself, really, because I have some questions. And it's like there's a meta dimension to the project. I'm thinking about it. You know, self-report, self-reportage. You know, so the idea of the cover story and the real story, you know, self-delusion, self-aggrandizement. And I mean, I don't know why I embraced God, and I don't know for sure why I turned away from him, you know. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. You asked me, and I haven't answered you. You asked me, why did I write the book? I started out, I was the brash, heterodox, iconoclastic Black conservative in the 80s. I got close to the sun. I almost went into the Reagan administration. I had the big scandal. So I had a story to tell. I mean, you know, it's kind of like I get the last word. You know, you all have been thinking what you've been thinking about Loury, but I get to tell you what, you know, the kind of definitive account.
Yeah.
And I thought that was it. The confessional aspect in that. But also, you know, there's a kind of rehabilitation dimension to that. There's a kind of, you know, I mean, he's not so bad at the end of the day. I mean, yeah, kind of thing like that. But as I got into it, I realized that you know, I am the primary audience for the reflection that I'm engaged in, and there's no point in lying to myself. I don't know. I don't know if you find any of this at all responsive, Jennifer.
No, absolutely. And you just said something, though, that I want to pick up on. I was very, very interested in your story when you mentioned religion. And when we weren't sure if we were going to ask this question for you, but you opened up that door. So I'm going to walk through it. I'm reading the book, and the book is, I mean, it's taking me through all kinds of emotions, from, you know, things like disgust to elation to like confusion. I mean, I'm running the gamut of emotions. And then I got really excited because I saw faith as something that brought you through your addiction. It brought you through closer to your family. And then you had several events. One in particular, I know that when in your conversation with your son, it wasn't just the death of, I believe her name was Shirley, that made you question your faith. There were several other things that led to that. But I have to tell you, I was deflated because I thought, for me, faith is very important. And I thought, you know, this was something that he could see himself, you know, a higher version of himself, a higher reason for being. And then it kind of just, it just dissipated. Where are you now on your faith journey, if at all? I mean, has it just gone out the window? Is it still a question in the back of your mind? Is it still something that drives you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I do invite it, and many people in correspondence, having read the book, people who are believers have written to me with this urgency. You know, we're moved by my embrace of Christianity and by the role that was playing in my recovery and reconstruction. There was something very affirmative about that. You know, there are all kinds of scenes in the book, but I'll just tell one. I'm teaching at Harvard. It's an ethics course, and I bring Charles Colson's Born Again, his testimony about finding Jesus while he was in prison for federal crimes in the Nixon scandal, to the attention of my colleagues at Harvard, saying that this could do something, because I wanted the kids that we were teaching to reflect on the difference between knowing what's right to do and actually doing the right thing. Doing the right thing is not an intellectual problem. It's a spiritual problem. Knowing the right thing is the intellectual problem, but that's only half the problem. And how religious faith might be helpful in that. So anyway, I'm sorry, I rambled. People are interested in the religious dimension. I set it up in the book, and it's pretty true to life, that I've got the rationalist. He's got an MIT PhD. He's a mathematician. He's a scientist. He doesn't believe in magic. He doesn't believe in myth. He believes in, as it were, what can be demonstrated. Against this guy who was lost in life and crawling on his hands and knees into the church and just holding on and being embraced and finding his getting his bearings. And I don't want to give the whole story away. There were levels to my crisis of faith. There was an intellectual level. How can I believe that a man was born to a virgin? That he was raised from the dead? That's asking an awful lot. But there was also this, the enemy within. There was I was still fighting with the devil that had been bedeviling me the whole of my life. And I wanted free from the implicit constraints that my being embedded within the faith community placed on my life. I wanted to be free. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. That's the horrible confession that is behind it. Yes, her name was Sherry DuPont. And she was my administrative assistant in this research center I was running at Boston University. And she was a wonderful woman, sang like a nightingale. I met her in her early mid-30s. She was a graduate of Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut. Having dropped out of school, she had gone to Howard University right out of high school on a music scholarship, but she never finished. And she came to work for me, and she's just a wonderful woman, very resourceful, very passionate, a deeply religious woman, very effective. And she went to law school. She, out of my office, got herself admitted to Boston University Law School, and she died. She died after the first year of law school from a viral heart infection that came up suddenly, and, she was gone. And there was her funeral, and I was disappointed with the way in which my congregation processed that funeral, the charismatic and evangelical, and the kind of thing. And they were all up in the spirit, and they were celebrating this everlasting life and the promises of community. And I wasn't feeling it, man. I was like, wait a minute, this is like a tragedy beyond comprehension. We need to just be still up in here. We need to just be in awe. We need to stand looking down into the crevice and realize the chasm goes all the way down. You're going to celebrate, So that was my, but that's kind of it's kind of a cover story. Now you asked me, where am I now? I'm married to an avowedly atheist woman. My wife, LaWan, my lovely wife, I always call her on the podcast. LaWan, who's a working class Black woman from Texas, 3rd Ward, same place that George Floyd came up. Different generation. Mm. She's a little bit older than Floyd, but man, and she you didn't ask me all this, but she came up in this Seventh-day Adventist cult, hyper, and they're waiting for Jesus to come back, and they literally getting ready for Jesus to come back. And, she can't put on lipstick or eat pork or, whatever. And she's like, in opposition to that, any faith claim, she's like, it visceral, kind of, rejecting it because it's oppressive, because it's, something that scarred her. So I say all of that to say I respect it in a way, but I don't share it. I don't share it at all. I think these people who are out here trying to find their way in a seemingly meaningless universe and trying to find something to hold on to and to believe in, trying to give themselves some reason for being, who are deferential in the face of the ultimate questions, the unfathomable, who have awe, who have modesty, who have, I think there's something to that. The spiritual quest is a part of the human condition. I mean, it's universal. There's nowhere you look in human culture that you don't find religion, and you don't find myth, and you don't find faith, and you don't find belief and whatnot. So to be so clever in our postmodernity that we would throw over all that we've inherited of the human endeavor to come into terms with the great spiritual questions and just say, oh, I'm going to make it up out of whole cloth. So I don't take my wife's point of view on these questions, even though I cannot affirm that a man was born to a virgin. Come on, don't ask me to believe that. There's no reason to ask me to believe that.
Well, Glenn, I'm going to step in about mine.
Dead? No, I'm serious about this. This is,
sure.
Raised from the dead. You're asking me to believe that someone was raised from the dead. I don't really believe it. I can tell you I believe it. I could go like this, hallelujah, hallelujah. But I don't really believe it.
And I think that's why it's referred to as faith. It's not referred to as reason or logic or rationality, but it is, in a sense, suspension of those mental virtues and belief of something which is higher. But I wanted to use that as a wonderful, if I might segue, to points of connection and points of difference. Because I remembered as you were talking that you and I share one or two things in common and something not in common. I grew up in the Ebenezer AME Church in Chesterfield County, Virginia, which is now part of Richmond. And I believe you knew Bethel AME as a youngster on the south side of Chicago. Yes. I also noticed that you have a whale on your shirt, and I have a hog on my shirt. Points of connection. But here is something which I think we diverge, and I'm dying to get your insights on this. In your book, you refer to your people as Black and low-income people. But I was wondering, suppose, Clint, you had grown up in Montgomery County, Maryland, prosperous suburb outside of D.C., or a Republican small-town suburb outside of Richmond or Atlanta. Would you feel the same visceral sense of identity or not? And by way of context, I'm someone who grew up in a small town suburb in Chester, Virginia. I've lived on land owned by my family since the 1870s. I grew up on a street named after my family. And we very much were part of that Ebenezer AME tradition. And so in some ways, my people were my close family. My people were the kids that I went to junior high and high school with. And my people were also these giants of industry I would read about in Black Enterprise magazine at Grandma's house on Terminal Avenue. So I guess my question once again is, if you had grown up in a different place, Montgomery County, Maryland, or a small town suburb in the South, would you still feel viscerally that your people are Black and low-income people? That's my question.
Yeah, that's also a good question. Winkfield.
What a name, right?
Well, now that wasn't my point, although That is
right.
What a name. We could go into that. I suppose there's a story behind that.
Right.
No, I was just going to say, you put your finger on this thing of how I am identifying myself in class and racial terms. Identifying the poor Black people are my people, the ghetto, the South Side of Chicago, the streets, the housing projects, the dark side, the other side of the line, my people. And in juxtaposition to that, my reaction to some African Americans who come from a different background, the people whose fathers were doctors and lawyers and Black college professors and things like that, who I call the Negro cognoscenti, and I
yes, you do.
say they're light-skinned, sedity. They are both more and less sophisticated than my people, that is lower-income Black people. They are more knowledgeable about the world, but less knowledgeable about the streets. I say they don't speak for me. I resent that they might be arrogating to themselves. And I have particular individuals in mind. I'm not going to name any names.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
But I could tell you some stories about these Negroes. And when I told that story about the having read Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, genealogy of morals kind of stuff. And I wanted to talk about it. And he's up there telling me, oh, that's a dead white man. Showing up to campus in a Benz. I mean, here I am, this working class kid in this elite college environment, and I'm barely holding on by my fingernails. And there's some Black kids who are playing the Black card. They Black, oppression, bald fists, but who are privileged. Yeah, I resented it. It's actually worse than that. I identified the authenticity of my being, my Blackness and my authenticity, and the extent to which I was actually being true to myself and not betraying my roots with the streets, with copying,
right?
Whatever you might be trying to cop. With fronting, with being a player, with the aspects of the culture of low-income Black that is not especially creditable. How perverse was that? So I don't think there's any doubt that the answer to your question is no, I would not identify myself in the same way had I had a different kind of upbringing. And I think the challenge, maybe to all of us who would invoke the concept of Blackness or Black identity, African American or whatever, is to be cognizant of that diversity of experience, and to realize, therefore, that the racial umbrella is probably completely inadequate to, why would you summarize it in terms of race? Why wouldn't we start talking about whose daddy was a preacher, whether or not there were single family homes on the block where they grew up, exactly, et cetera.
Yeah, I can tell you from personal experience in a recent conversation. Notice how my voice goes down because I live in a Soviet household, Glenn. But but I can. Jennifer knows what I'm talking about. She's laughing. But in all reality, I had an article, recent conversation where the point was made that the key line between Black students is between those Black students who grew up in predominantly white spaces and those who grew up in predominantly Black spaces, and that cultural divide, if you will, that way of seeing the world, those racial memories, continue to live on in college. They don't go away. And one wonders, will those divides continue when those kids become then adults in the adult world, in the workplace? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. Yeah.
Where I found a lot of connection between your story and Glenn's story is this idea of the Black elite. So I read that part of your book, Glenn, with a lot of interest and thinking of having Wink in mind. And Wink, I'm not sure, what stories that you might want to tell, but one of the questions that we also in our book is about, this idea of privilege and it's not only the domain of white people, but that a lot of Black people who would be considered to have, let's say, Black privilege, that is one of Wink's words, Black privilege, that we talk about in our book, are actually some of the most aggressive in pushing this oppressor-oppressed line. And the irony to me is just quite thick. I don't know, Wink, if you want to carry on with some of your stories that might dovetail with what Glenn has written in his book. But that to me was...
Yeah. And I suspect none of this is new to Glenn, I suspect. We see echoes of it in Glenn's great book. But I think sometimes, and I'm speculating now, that there's a psychological need to overcompensate because one's life experience diverges from the collective narrative experience, right? Right. So this explains, for example, how you can go to a swanky Black establishment in a upper class place, and all the books will be revolutionary in nature. Comrade Sisters, Sisters of the Black Panther Party, Black Power Kitchen. You know what I'm talking about, Glenn. And so to me, that's incoherent. But yet I find so few people who have known comfortable situations are willing to directly say that. It's like the emperor has no clothes, but everyone is content just to live an unexamined life, kind of go along to get along, right? So Blackness is oppression, nothing else matters, right? So what are your thoughts on that? That we're seeing some of the most despondent and dire rhetoric from some of the most privileged people on the planet. You know, people who are second and third generation Ivy League, for example. People whose great-grandparents had summer homes in Sag Harbor and Martha's Vineyard. People, for example, who can read about their ancestors in history textbooks. People, for example, who live on property that a great-great-grandfather acquired in the 1870s. I mean, those are real people, real Black Americans, but it seems that their stories are never recognized in the collective narrative. The collective narrative recognizes the activists. It recognizes a certain past in terms of rhetoric and permissible language in the public square. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it exposes something that's really fundamental. So the political advocacy that centers African-American claims, Blackness, descendants from slaves, post-Jim Crow, reparations worthy, white supremacy, that is a kind of politics. It's a kind of way of thinking about things. And the class lens is different from that. The class lens, you know, in classic Marxian terms, is asked, what's your relationship to the relations and the means of production? It's about interest and about claiming and so on resources. And what goes on within when the Sag Harbor third generation owning set make the racial claim, there's a kind of exploitation that's happening there because they're getting the benefit from a claim that's only legitimate because of structures of actual economic and social advantage from which they benefit. So that, and I mean, I'm not a revolutionary Marxist, whatever. But if I were, I could see how this argument would go. You know, what did Malcolm X say? You've been bamboozled. You've been hoodwinked.
Right.
You've been led to think that, you know, it was about this when it was really about this.
Mm. That's a good point. That's a very good point. And I didn't mention another aspect of it, but as you can imagine, Glenn, or this may not surprise you, I am probably one of the strongest opponents of reparations for American slavery. I've written about it. I once joked, tongue in cheek, that I would write 1,000 essays to oppose reparations for American slavery. It is such a horrible idea because I'll just list three. One, it disrespects our ancestors, our grandparents, and our grandparents' grandparents, who were able to get by and prosper in some cases without the need for reparations. Are you saying that their achievements should be now erased and replaced with a collective narrative of disempowerment? Number two, it's bad because it forces us to be backward looking as opposed to forward seeking. And any group of people will prosper the most when they're forward reaching as opposed to backward seeking. And number three, I oppose it because, quite frankly, I can't think of a better way to ensure divisions and balkanization of the American society than to group people into boxes or categories. You get a reparation, you get a reparation, you don't get a reparation. I don't know about you, you're half black and half white. We'll have to have a committee about that, a commission to decide whether or not you get reparations. So for many reasons, I think that's a very bad idea in terms of advancing the American body politic. But an additional bonus reason why it's bad, there are Black American families today that are descendants of generations, not one person, generations, as I lower my voice in my Soviet household, free Black slave owners. I mean, I can tell you about families that have owned. Okay, you're laughing. It's true.
No, because I know it's true. I know it's true, and I also know it's like saying that the caloric intake of people on plantations who were enslaved people was higher than was the caloric intake of working class Irish and in Boston or New York City in 1850. Yeah. I mean, that's also true, but you don't want to be caught saying
right. So when you kind of raise these facts, people have this novel ability just to not hear it or just to erase it away. It's an incredible thing. So you have the historical records, you have the data, you have the documents, but it's just not consistent with the story. So it's just it's not acknowledged, which to me is just very strange indeed. But
I want to add to your list of reasons for thinking that reparations is a terrible idea. I agree with what you said, but I want to add to that because it's disempowering in the extreme. Who is the audience for the reparations advocacy? Who are you talking to? Who do you expect to be responding? The very structures that you allege dispossessed you. You give them the power to either be magnanimous and grant you your claim, or to be the bad guy who, but for the fact that they didn't grant the claim, I would be whole.
Yeah.
How's that making a life? I mean, think about the agency aspect of that. You surrender. You throw yourself on the mercy of the court. You abdicate.
Yeah.
So
you blow up.
History doesn't owe us anything. I think this is a very destructive idea.
Yeah.
You have to make your way in the world. No one said that life was fair.
Yeah.
It is living in bad faith. That's my critique.
So who's pushing this idea, Glenn, in the year 2024? Like, who's advancing this idea? Why is it gathering traction so much?
Well, that's a good question. A political scientist should be. I mean, because, Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, has just announced he's $500,000 or something that he's allocating to have a commission to study the whatever in the politics of that. Why would the former organizer for the Chicago Teachers Union, African American, coming off the West Side, with the background that he has and the politics that he has on the left of the Democratic Party, take that up in that city? I'm sure there's an answer to that question about why they think that that's a good strategic move.
Right.
and we're a bit away from the summer of 2020 now, the sort of heyday of the anti-racism mania. But this could be an echo of that. These things kind of have a life of their own once they get going. I don't know. What do the culture barons have to say to people who are writing the scripts for these TV shows and movies that are depicting African-American political striving where reparations has been known to come up? So
it's just very strange. I'm thinking of the Pride Family, the Disney show where the little kids were screaming and chanting for reparations excitedly. You may have heard of that. Yeah, that's. I think back to my grandmother, who was born in 1897, died in 1983. I never, ever, ever, never heard Grandma say, Winkfield Jr., I just can't live my life until I get some reparations for slavery. That their mindset was not that way. Their mindset was, I need to buy property, or I need to keep the property I've inherited. I need to live a good moral life, a good spiritual life. I need to create a tradition for my children and grandchildren. Their mindset was always very much about becoming the best ancestors they could for us, because they had great ancestors who had been slaves, who had acquired property and made a better way for themselves. I mean, it seems to me that, and this is my opinion, we lost a lot of value that was good in culture and consciousness when we pivoted in the 70s and 80s to more of an external locus of control mindset. I think Black individuals have always prospered the most when we've lived deep inside of internal locus of control, or agency, for lack of a better word. If you look at some of the key examples from Black history, Frederick Douglass, you read his young life, that's internal locus of control par excellence, right? He makes his way to freedom, he learns to read, becomes a preacher. John Mercer Langston, he becomes the first Black lawyer in Ohio, becomes dean of Howard's Law School, a congressman from Virginia. I mean, I could go on and on with examples of people who lived in great internal locus of control, but we seem to have forgotten that in the post-Black power, Black nationalism, Malcolm X days. So it's just interesting to me how there have been those shifts and waves in terms of changes in consciousness.
But I mean, couldn't you argue about Malcolm X and about the Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
the Black Muslims, the Elijah Muhammad following Muslims? That, I mean, because I came up in Chicago in the 60s and these guys were around. There was still a kind of straight back dignity. I mean, they were starting their own businesses and they didn't have their hand out like this. They did have their fist balled up like this, but they didn't have their hand out like this.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by being in bad faith. I mean, it's like you expect somebody else to solve your problem for you. You're not, and you call it agency, you say locus of control. So I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. But why is there not an effective counter argument within the Black traditions that, you talk about the ancestors and about the heroism of them, what they accomplished under, adverse conditions and what we owe them, a kind of, and why is that impulse not finding more broad and full-throated expression in the intellectual and critical cultural reflections of African American in our art? Is there something about the climate of conformity and political correctness and woke? You have to affirm, you have to be on the right side of history, that is impeding the effectiveness of our own intellectual self-assessment. We can't even be honest about what's actually happening.
So my hope is that there'll be an intellectual and a cultural reaction. So, for example, this wave of conformity we're living through currently, that the young kids who are born and come of age in the 2030s and the 2040s will tire of living lives devoid of agency. They will want to, and will rediscover the great lives of the great ancestors. They will become nonconformers because they'll rebel against their elders, as every generation does. That's my thought, is that we're going to see a golden age in Black culture and consciousness. It's yet to be born, but it's on the horizon because there'll be a reaction to this great cultural conformity of the 2020s. That's my thought. That's just my thought. And this brings us to a nice topic. Jen, I think you want to say something before I raise it.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're talking about language, and Glenn just mentioned, why aren't we having these conversations? Who are the people to bring them up? And this brings me to something. I've been quiet and listening. Glenn, you mentioned in your book that you are the status of race in America, and your own race has something to do with how your comments are received. And I'm going to quote. You say, "White conservatives who called out the BLM rioters found themselves accused of racism. Such charges would not stick to me." And this is a question that Wink and I grapple with in our book. As a matter of fact, at one point, Charles Love lovingly called Wink my black filter, because I would go to him and say, there was this, I'll tell you, it's a silly anecdote, but a woman in my church had beautiful hair, and I was so afraid to tell her that her hair was beautiful, because then it would be seen as a white-black thing, whereas her hair was just truly beautiful. And Wink laughs at me. Charles Love laughed at me. But I feel like there is, in having these conversations, I don't know that I have a voice. And if I'm doing this truth-telling alongside Wink or even on my own, how can I have these discussions? Will I just be dismissed and replaced? Like you mentioned, you have a voice. It'll stick. I don't know that I do have that voice, and I don't know how it carries.
Jennifer, you expect me to solve a problem that is baked into the cake. So I actually wrote about this. I have an essay on self-censorship where, from the 1990s, it's actually going to be reprinted in an updated version. They're going to make a small book. Polity Press is going to put it out in the spring of next year. Self-censorship in public discourse. Anyway, the long and short of it is there's no such thing as free speech. I mean, you can be free from the restraint of the law in response to what you say, the government, but you can't be free of the fact that people, when they hear what you say, will form whatever opinions about you that they will form. And you can't be free of the fact, in the case at hand, that you're white in a discussion about race, you'll be seen as a white person saying this or saying that. And you're asking me to somehow relieve you of the impediment or the burden, anticipating that people will take your whiteness into account when they hear what you say, and perhaps to your discredit, which you regret. And I regret it. But it's baked into the cake. Can I give you cover? Yeah, I can give you cover. I can say even a Black person would say the same thing that you're saying, and that would allow you to feel a little bit more protected in saying it yourself. But I don't know. This is, by the way, my argument with Coleman Hughes, the young Coleman Hughes. He has a book out, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America. And, people should read the book. And I like Coleman. I think he's smart, and, But there's something that I find disquieting about the book. So in the book, he says, you have the anti-racists, but the anti-racists are really the racists, and that the real anti-racist was the Martin Luther King, I have a dream anti-racist. And I think that's over in short. I'm not going to do a whole exegesis on Coleman's book, but I think that's overly simplified. I think it misses something. Blindness, and these ideas need to be interrogated. Of course, he doesn't mean literally you don't see race. Well, then what do you mean? He says it shouldn't matter with respect to how you conduct yourself in private and public life, but obviously it does matter.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great idea to chew on for a bit. Colorblindness, because Jen and I had talked about that earlier. for starting the podcast. And I love Coleman Hughes. I love his nonconformity, his independence, his
he's
deep
terrific.
logic. I love the guy. But I probably wouldn't have chosen that as a title for my book because, as you suggest, it invites the natural critique, right? Because we can all see color. I mean, even those who aren't moved by color can see color. So where should we be headed if not color blindness? Suppose color blindness is incoherent, as you write in your book. I just wonder, what is a yellow brick road at this point? How do we get to a place called Oz in the land of race? So I, for example, have chosen the path of just retiring from Blackness, a la Thomas Chatterton Williams and Adrian Piper. I read Thomas's book, Unlearning Race, and I was persuaded. And particularly when I read about Adrian Piper's account of deciding just to hang up her black shingles, that appealed to me as an individual. Tina Mason, who Jen and I know, have talked about racelessness as the yellow brick road towards the better place. Angel Eduardo has talked about color blah. I probably would prefer the word color indifference as opposed to color blah, but it's essentially the same thing. The question is, if we live in a color conscious world, and I would agree with that, should color indifference be the aim, the yellow brick road? And do we just simply go wrong when we conflate blackness with the political? Because blackness is more than the political. It's the human condition. It's how you love a distant cousin who's cute. It's how you worship together at the table over Thanksgiving dinner. It's zoning out on a Star Trek marathon. You can be black and do all those things, and none of those things are political. So what's the aim? What's the yellow brick road, Glenn, if not color blindness?
Okay. This is an important question for me because I, as you know from the book, am kind of embedded within a narrative, reading my own life through a lens of being a black man.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're embedded in the flow of history, and it's not a static situation. You know, the dynamics are trending, I think, toward racelessness or less racedness than had been the case in the past. I think there's no doubt about that. It's fluid, you know, the margins, intermarriage, you know, identity things where people are making claims, I'm black, I'm white, you know, and then who's going to adjudicate that? There's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on in the interstices. Thomas Chatterton Williams' mother is white, his father is black, his mother of his children is a French woman, she's white. He's looking at his daughter and, you know, saying, are we going to really impose these binaries on this child? You know, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I knew or know, I haven't seen her in a very long time, Adrian Piper, the artist and philosopher, who is a brilliant woman and very creative and also working in the margins, working in the interstices, in the spaces, in the interspaces, you know.
Yes.
So, you know, I think 100 years from now in the United States of America, if you ask what does blackness mean, the answer is going to be very, very different than what it meant 50 years ago or than what it means today. And we're going to have to work that out. Now, I think it raises a lot of interesting questions. It raises some philosophical questions. You know, my son is a gay man. I did come up in the AME church. We were taking the kids to an AME church for a while. And he's like saying, all those people think that I'm going to go to hell because I'm gay. And he's mad at me. Right. And I'm trying to say, don't be mad at them, man. These are just some Christians. They don't mean you any harm, really. I mean, they're really pretty decent people. I agree with you. I say to him, I agree with you about, it's okay for you to be gay. I'm not, you know, you're not going to go to hell. I don't think you're going to go to hell. But these are not bad people. These are, you know, and I'm saying, look, we used to be a society where everybody was in the closet, and we're becoming a society where people can just do what they want to do. some of the people from the old school are still with us. What are we going to do? Throw them in, throw them in the dustbin of history? I mean,
Right.
we can be a little bit charitable. I'm trying to say to him. So that's my question to you people who are getting ready to throw away race. What are you going to do with a guy like me who still wants to hold on a little bit to the narrative of his life that he wants to read through the South Side of Chicago?
That's a great question, Glenn. I love that question. Thank you so much. I so often feel the same way, just from a different angle, right? So when I was growing up, to me, Blackness equaled enterprise because I would read Black Enterprise magazine at Grandma's house. Blackness was Earl Graves Jr., Percy Sutton, John Johnson, Barry Gordy, Reginald Loury. You know the whole lineup of characters. And I was so surprised to find that people had a different definition of Blackness when I entered college and law school in a larger world. And the young generation today, Blackness, oppression, nothing. I sometimes feel like a dinosaur. I kind of feel like, as you suggested, time is moving by. My generational way of understanding Blackness is going to become obsolete. What do I do? How do I make
I got it. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned Earl Graves, and we have to remember Earl Graves, Black Enterprise magazine. And I knew Earl Graves. I was a part of the Council of Black Economics. He had a group. It was Andrew Brimmer, Phyllis Wallace, Marcus Alexis, Bernard Anderson, myself, and a couple of other people. These were Black economists, and he would fly us down to Barbados or whatever to conferences and stuff like that. Earl Graves, who wanted to get on corporate board, he wanted to play the real game. He sent his kids to Yale or whatever.
I know the type.
Establishment. I mean, a solid foundation for multi-generational, wealth and influence in the American system. I mean, Black capitalism, nothing wrong with it. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
There you go. And my grandma, my uncle James Scott Twyman, they would just look on approvingly as I devoured all those pages, because that was their conception of Blackness too, right? You're doing what needs to be done to advance in this society, however unjust it might be. But like I said, I feel that same sense of becoming more obsolete as the young generation grows up. And so I in a sense, I almost have come to the place where, well, number one, I just can't abide the dogma. I just can't abide the slogan words. You're never going to convince me that Blackness equals perpetual victimhood. That's not my bag. That's not my game. That's not how I'm oriented. My neural pathways don't accept that. Does not compute. So for me, logically, retirement from Blackness is a way to retain my mental human dignity and coherence, because I refuse to buy into a system that defines Blackness so disadvantageously. And so the question then becomes,
but don't you see how the very necessity of, quote, announcing your retirement from Blackness is in a way a tribute to Blackness? Doesn't it give the category meaning even as you eschew it? I mean,
question. I definitely do, because if you retire from working in the office, or if you retire as a football coach or as a Army general, I mean, you retain the muscular memory of working in the office or working as the coach or working as a soldier. So I'm not suggesting that I'm losing for getting all of my muscular memory of growing up in Blackness as Black American. It formed who I am. It's a part of who I am. But I do think that it's a small way I can undercut the power of dogma that I disagree with. I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn, wrote an essay called "Live Not in Lies" or something like that. Maybe that was a phrase in his essay. But the point being, an individual can't change society, but the least you can do, at least in your personal life, is to make personal choices that don't mouth the lie, that don't strengthen the lie, that don't reinforce the lies, as it was, say, in the Soviet Union. To me, I very much see the current state of Blackness is almost Soviet in nature to the degree that it imposes dogma and slogan words on free-thinking people, right? I love free Black thought, for example, because people are open-minded, curious.
Okay, I got to object. I got to object. I object.
Go right ahead. Jump in.
Listen to yourself.
Okay.
Solzhenitsyn? The Gulag
Yes.
Archipelago?
Uh-huh. Yes.
Come on.
It's a
well, hold on. Let me finish. Let me make my point. You made your point. Let me make mine.
Yes.
This is nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
The massive apparatus of the state employed to suppress millions of people across a continent based on an ideology that has death camps at it at the end of the chain is nothing like this whatsoever. And the fact that you would invoke that analogy,
sure,
is indicative of hysteria. And the question becomes, why does the question of race engender such hysteria?
Oh,
that's a question about you. That's a question about you, not about race.
Okay.
Gulag Archipelago? Come on, man. Come on.
Okay, let me answer.
Totalitarianism? Death camps?
Can I reply?
Yeah.
Okay, here's my answer, Clint. And thank you for that vigorous critique. I appreciate that. Because, in the law, we always recognize that one can make an argument by using the most extreme examples of something to discredit it. So you have done a great job in suggesting that these manifestations that I allude to are not real and they're overblown. Well, I think that is true. I think those examples are certainly not examples we live with today. But if you dig deeper, Clint, if you dig deeper into what I'm getting at, it's not the external manifestations of the camps and the state system. It's the smaller, more personal things that the author of The Power of the Powerless wrote about. The writer, the playwright from Prague.
Yeah, that was Václav Havel.
Exactly.
I love that essay. I love The Power of the Powerless.
I love it too.
Go on.
Yeah, sure. And one of the things he suggests is that during that system, people would mouth certain phrases or slogan words, workers of the world unite. And they would watch what they said. And that was the mindset that allowed the system to continue. Similarly, I suggest that among those who are nonconformers, there's an increasing desire and sense of watching what you say in certain circumstances. Notice that 2 or 3 times in this conversation where I've looked to the side and kind of lowered my voice. And in fact, Clint, notice the background. Do you see the wonderful background? That's the Brooklyn. I don't usually sit here. Jen will tell you, I usually sit for podcasts in my regular place, all of my diplomas. So why do I sit here for this podcast? It's because my normal place is above my family member who's home for the week. And I know my family just laughing. I know my family members' perception of my opinions. So I was forced to have this podcast here because of that desire to respond to the dogma and slogan words of someone else. If that's not the beginning of the bad place, what is the beginning of the bad place, right?
No, well, you have insinuated earlier in the conversation here that you were in a Soviet whatever, and I interpreted that to mean that you didn't want to be overheard by people sharing space with you who might disagree, and because you knew you'd be judged, you knew you'd be held to some kind of account. But I'm sorry, I'm not sure you're appreciating my point, which is that's a kind of tyranny. I mean, I loved that essay of Havel.
Yes, great.
To live within the truth, to not be complicit in the reproduction of the lie. The greengrocer puts the workers of the world unite sign in the window because he just wants to get along. He doesn't want the party apparatchik coming around saying something. And the lady who's getting her vegetables sees the sign and doesn't say anything, but she knows it doesn't mean anything and it's all a fraud and everybody is complicit.
Right.
And that's a small illustration of a larger thing that makes the system go. And it's a system of lies. It's a system of lies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is race that? Is race the experience of race in American life? That? Is it a system of lies? Is it a compromise with the devil? Is it a surrendering of our soul? Is it a flowing along with the crowd down the river of pseudo-life? That's a quote from Havel. He says, that's the power of the powerless. The power of the powerless is they're prepared to say the emperor has no clothes. They're prepared to live within the truth, come what may. And is race that? I don't think so. Frankly, I don't think so. And in fact, I think this is my argument ultimately with Coleman. He says the end of race politics, and then he says arguments for a colorblind America. How did you get to politics? I get the idea that here's a woman, I love her. The fact that she's not Black should not impede me from making a union with her. I get the idea that I shouldn't live in a box. I get that. How did you get to the end of race politics from the personal claim that racial identity is a heavy coat that I choose not to wear? I choose to take it off. Politics? That means mass incarceration. That means urban ghettos, and what are you going to do about it? That means how do you interpret the 14th Amendment given the history of this country, and so on? That means who's the mayor of Chicago? That means what's the tax rate? There's no race politics. I can't take race into account when I'm talking about politics. You never demonstrated that. You asserted that. You asserted that on the basis of a relatively narrow, and I don't think all that profound claim, which is that when I go through life, I shouldn't let race be that much of a determinant of who I am or what I do. The country still has the history that it has. You didn't elide and erase that by your personal claim of liberty. I wish not to be encumbered by the raciality of society. Therefore what about politics? Not very much as far as I can see.
And I guess my rejoinder would be, if we're going to change the way things are, we have to change it one person at a time, because that's how cultural change always takes place, right? So cultural change doesn't take place in one fell swoop. So we have to begin with people who we might call dissidents or free thinkers, thinking B rather than A, or Y rather than Z. And that develops an intellectual momentum of its own. And then you can change society over time so that incarceration or ghetto structural conditions are the result of individual agency and actions, not group agencies and actions. So in other words, it's the way that you look at and perceive life. Even if you're just one person that looks at life a certain way can inspire another person, and then another person. There's a wonderful essay called Self-reliance by a famous writer in the 1800s. And he talks about the idea that it's the most original and creative and non-conforming personalities that have the most lasting impact on society, because they don't see life as other people see it, if that makes sense. You have the greatest intellectual advances from people who see the margins, who see the nuance, who see the complexity in life, right? So for me, I think that looking at the world through whatever individual lens I may have is a greater benefit and choice to life than looking at the world in a conforming way, and that if everyone else sees racial group identity, then I should see it as well. I don't think that's the way to advance. There was a wonderful essay in Free Press, which is published by Barry Weiss, and the essay said the essay was actually written by a Russian refusenik who lives in Israel. He said, what we learned as dissidents was that if at least 20% of a population refuses to mouth the dogma and slogan wars, if they're non-conforming, and that 20% can ensure that free thought will nourish, prosper, and grow. And I think similarly, and we may disagree with Coleman Hughes's approach to it, but I think that part of the value of people like Coleman and Thomas Williams and Adrian Piper and Sheena and Angel Eduardo is they're forming that 20% that will allow more creative and original ways to think about race to develop, nurture, and grow. And to me, that's the exciting thing. It's not so exciting to conform and do what's been done before. It's exciting to look at things with a fresh eye, a creative eye. I hope I'm answering your question as best I can. I really, as a person, am very much of an individualist. When I think of my people, I think of people who are non-conforming, who are creative.
Let me ask you a question. Why isn't this escapism? I'm gonna call it race escapism.
Well, that's a great question.
Why isn't this a privilege?
Interesting.
You know,
why is this a privilege?
Why? If I think about the legacies of racial domination and oppression in the country, such as they are in the 21st century, the people subject to those legacies of adverse living don't have the option of escaping from "quote unquote" race. It's
right.
I mean, at least this is a line of critique. I'm not sure I believe it or not. I'm just thinking out loud.
Sure.
I'm thinking, do we not have to worry that the very exercising of the option of racial escapism is itself a kind of
privilege.
Yeah, privilege. Yeah.
Okay.
Revealing something that's not all that flattering about the system.
Sure. And of course, when you choose the word escapism, aren't we framing the issue in a sense, right?
Yeah, we are.
Use the word exactly, right? And so I would probably use different words if you like. So, for example, you might call it transformation, or you might call it transcendent, or transracialism, or you might call it humanism or human dignity. There's so many different words that you could use to convey the same intellectual movement that would have a more positive connotation. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, you said retirement. That was the word that you used when you introduced this.
Exactly. I guess my point is retirement from race, like retirement in the civilian workforce, is a recognition that you've done a good thing over your career. You've put in the hour, the time. You tried to be the best worker, be doctor, lawyer, coach, whatever that you could be. Now you've reached the next phase of your life where you can enjoy the fruits of your labor and really become more of who you are as a person. Similarly, I think retirement from Blackness can be seen the same way. If you've spent your entire life doing all the good things that you can to bring into existence a better place, however defined, at some point as an individual, you can make the choice to decide, okay, I'm now going to focus on other aspects of my humanity or my human dignity or my human dimension. And I think that's comparable. And I think that's healthy, actually. Is it privilege? Everyone has privilege. To some degree, right?
Let me state my rebuttal position succinctly.
Okay.
I don't see the necessity of that. I think an unargued for premise informs that move, which is that there is something morally and you say humanity in some essential way wrong about racial identification. It could be irrational, whatever. And I don't find that to be particularly persuasive. And I moreover, as I say, the political implication. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't want to repeat myself.
No problem. So, well, the great thing about life, Glenn, is if there are over 40 million Black Americans, there are over 40 million life stories, experiences, and perspectives. That's one of the things I love about life. we can disagree without being disagreeable.
And thank you, Glenn, for sharing your life story.
Yes, definitely.
Black Americans.
Oh, you're welcome, Jennifer. Wink.
This was good.
We appreciate you.
This was good.
Okay. Take care.
All right.
Take care.